There it is. Recording.
Before.
As long as people don't walk out of the field of view, I think it should be fine.
Okay. Do I need to stand here and monitor it, or it's,
I would say just you can actually turn it a little bit.
But that's a
If you
problem.
want to sit down, you can turn it down like this.
okay.
People think in simple scenarios. When you say Israel and Palestine, people think of Indians in North America. They think of the region, Australia, and so on. And it's a very, very different situation in Israel. But it's easy to think in simple templates.
Or just the fact that, suicide bombers are justified in Holland because they're played. It's like, no, there's nothing to justify it.
Again, it's all about a complex context, in a sense as many people suffered in history. Including Jews. I don't ever remember Jewish people coming into coffee shops in Germany and blowing themselves up. Not even during World War II. And there were opportunities if they wanted to. So, people have choice. That's the context.
We do have someone from there. Someone's coming, I don't know.
No, you're the videographer.
I guess so.
Okay.
Well, somebody has to be, I guess. Hi.
Come on in. If we get more people than we have chairs, I'm going to ask those south of 50 to teach in fashion, make it on the floor so we can get more people in here. Yes. Well, you also get to define yourself whether you're north of 50 or south of 50. I'm right on the fence. So I guess should we start?
Just a second. If you want to settle in,
Beverly.
give him a second. Okay.
Yeah, there's a couple of cushions over here. Here.
Can we get to this
A
one?
couple of seats over here as well.
Person's coming.
No
You
rabbit.
give the sign language. Oh. She can have done that.
There are seats over here.
There's also a chair.
I understand that New York right now with her sisters.
Well, we will have the young generation here.
I'm so
The
sorry.
very young
The very young generation.
Point number one was standing for Israel. Take your pacifier out of your mouth.
Where
Thank
is
you.
all the stuff?
Oh, it's over here.
Let's pass.
Do you want to pass it out?
Want to wait to the end?
Where do you think? Pass it.
We're by the time they're getting Okay, we have stuff for you guys. If you'll please pass them along. Take one and pass. A lot of what we're going to talk today is in those pages and much more. It's a very good resource, we believe.
So, I guess we might just well launch in.
Yes.
Welcome. This is the room where we're talking about when and how to stand up for Israel. Let's just begin briefly by introducing ourselves. Me, you already heard from. I'm Peter Melnick, and my right to be here is that I'm an American Jew who's gotten himself self-educated, and I'm
Excuse me?
yes.
Some extra? Thank you.
Constantly learning more about the process of supporting Israel. My day job is as a composer, and I'm an advertisement for the fact that you don't need to be on your way to your PhD in order to be an Israel advocate. And this is Ami Cohen.
Hi, I'm Ami, and I'm on my way to the PhD. Eventually, one should hope. And I'm also learning how to work on how to advocate Israel. I never done it before I came here. So we all have this learning process going on. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. That was your other part over here.
Okay, so, sorry, there's a confusion here. Anyway, so the first thing I want to talk about, just a bit of a background, is that we need to understand the psychological process people have when they think about political issues such as that of Israel. And the cognitive way of operation of our brain, everybody's brain, is to look for simple stories, for simple templates, scenarios, and just make the story, the complex story, become simple by fitting it to the scenario. Stereotypes come from that, by the way, in racism. And also Israel, and every one of us suffer from that, because the story of the conflict is very complex. But it's very easy to think in terms of good guys and bad guys when you put the Israeli-Palestinian conflict into the scenario of colonialism, imperialism. It's easy to compare Israel to the Europeans in Australia, for example, and the Palestinians to the natives. And you'll hear it a lot. So the starting point is a problem for us. The only way to fight it is to know the facts. We give you resources, for example, the timeline. If you're not really knowledgeable, it's a place to start, but it's an ongoing process. The more you know the fact, the easier it is to fight against these simplifications that makes us look so bad and harms us. Just for an example, how many of you in this room ever heard the argument that the Palestinians are being punished for what the Nazis did in World War II? And that's why, Jews got a state, as a prize, if you wish. Anybody ever heard it here?
No.
There was a Persian guy named Ahmadinejad talking.
Oh my goodness.
Right. So the answer here, if you know the facts, is pretty simple. The fact is that on the eve of World War II, there are already 500,000 Jews to become Israel. And that year already the British offered to divide the country into a Palestinian state and a Jewish state. Okay? Which of course goes against that basic false argument.
It's also equally easy to be simplistic in pro-Israel positions, and as advocates of Israel, I think that doesn't help the cause ultimately. For example, a great slogan of the first Aliyah, the period of the first major influx of new Yishuv Jews from 1880 to the early 20th century, there was this marvelous slogan, a people without a land for a land without a people. Only trouble was it wasn't a land without a people, but it sure sounded good, and it wipes out the Palestinian problem right there, because if there were no people there, there's no issue. But it isn't the truth, and the truth is far more complex than I could try and summarize right now. But that's why we say that the most important thing to do is to build your own base of knowledge. Now, you can't give a dissertation, you can't ever encapsulate the entire truth in one session, no matter what. So then the next trick is to be defining for yourself where you're speaking. You need to which gets to my next point, knowing your audience. Who are you talking to? Is it a college crowd? Is it a Jewish crowd? Is it a mixed crowd? Is it a hostile crowd? I've had the experience of being in, I deliberately went to a church where there was a speech being given. The audience was non-Jewish, I think mainly liberal, it was Unitarian, I think. The speakers were mixed Arab and an Israeli person who'd been on tour in the territories with an Arab group. And it was very clear, because I knew the group giving the speech, that the talk was going to be polemical, one-sided in the extreme. They talked a great deal about the pains and the harms of the checkpoints and the barrier. without giving any of the bounds, any of the issues that were why the barrier might exist or why there were checkpoints. And I knew that being in that room was going to be really tough. My only shot at providing balance, as the one person in the room, as far as I could tell, who had that agenda, was to ask a question during the Q&A. And I knew that I had to present myself in a way that was going to not turn people off, so if I started frothing at the mouth, I would have lost. But I had to be very aware that I had an audience that I thought was up for grabs, people who were open-minded. And it was very important that I present myself in a way that this audience could respond to. And it would be a totally different story if I were in a Jewish room. So knowing your audience is critical.
Yeah,
Oh, well, I talked about, this is a good question. I began by acknowledging the validity of many of the points that were made because there was tremendous validity to it. The checkpoints are an incredible hardship. They are, and I'm cribbing a bit from what Ami was going to be talking about later on, but we'll jump around. They're an incredible hardship in terms of the time that they cost people. They're a hardship in terms of the fact that they can be degrading, dehumanizing. Sometimes the behavior of the IDF soldiers who are involved with the checkpoints is not something we can be proud of. It's a reality. You have to acknowledge that in that room especially, because they just heard an hour about that. The barrier, also, you have to acknowledge that the barrier poses all kinds of hardships and sometimes even creates unnecessary hardships, as in times where the barrier was located in ways that separated, for example, a farmer's property from their home. So, you acknowledge all that, and then you have two critical answers. One, the checkpoints are critical because they're saving lives. They're necessitated by terror. And you can elaborate on that a little bit. And two, about the barrier, you make the same point, that suicide bombings were down 85% since the barrier came into being. That's huge. And then, if you have time to go further, you talk about the fact that yes, sometimes the barrier was built in places that created unnecessary hardships. And here's a very interesting thing to mention then. The Israeli Supreme Court has adjudicated 4 cases about that. And in the first of those cases that's come down, the court, I think in 2 cases now, the court has ruled that certain sections of the barrier had to be moved so as to remove unnecessary hardships. That is the rule of law, and that's a great thing that Israel can be very proud of. So you have, at that point, you've acknowledged something which is real, and you've also ended up saying the other side of it, and you end up, I think, doing some good. So, I'll give this over to you.
Well, I need to improvise now, because I was about just to say what Peter was saying, but I'll just add that the way you come across is very important. When you talk in a crowd, the way you present yourself will make it everything. It's, metaphorically speaking, you can talk about a gate. The first thing that comes out of your mouth will either open the gate or shut it off. You can either come across as a serious person, as a knowledgeable person, as a balanced person, or as a joke, or extremist. Now, and I have many examples. When I was also in a similar situation like Peter was, I came with a friend. He was very courageous. He took the first time to take the question, and he did more damage than good. Why? Because he was so extreme. He was so even physically loud and aggressive that people in the audience were just thinking to themselves, and right for a fact, he just showed the speaker is right. The Israelis are barbarians. They are, all those bastards that those speakers just described. Okay? So I think that, and I'm continuing what Peter said, you want to be balanced. It's a good thing that when you start a sentence, you do want to say or acknowledge, the other side, saying yes, some Palestinians were chased out in the 48 war, or yes, there are Palestinian refugees, or maybe even yes, they are still suffering, and then balance it with the but. Okay? It will make you much more convincing. Another thing that you might work to your aid, if you are knowledgeable, if you have a title of a knowledgeable person, for example, in my case, I'm from Israel, or if you are someone who studied the issue a lot, or you visit Israel, it all comes into your aid. I like to always start and say, for example, about the checkpoints. I always say, well, I come from Israel. I was in the checkpoints as a soldier, and also as a visitor, as a peace activist, and exactly as Peter said, I acknowledge the suffering there. It's true. It's a bad situation. But then give it the justifications. And it comes really good. And people afterwards will come after you and want to hear more. Because they think you're a reliable source and a knowledgeable source. So don't be ashamed to say if you come from Israel, or you visited, or you're Jewish, or anything else. I think it's only on your benefit.
I'd also like to add, that particular day, I remember, I think I handled myself pretty well. I was almost physically ill from the process of controlling myself and presenting a good, centered person. I got home, I remember describing to my wife and son how ill I felt and how tough it was. And I wondered whether I'd done any good at all. Fade. 9 months later, Rabbi Arthur Gross Schaefer had a community sukkah event at which there were Muslims, Christians, Jews. It was a wonderful event. And there was a woman who came up to me and she said, I don't know if you remember me, but it turned out she'd been in that room. And she said, I was so glad you were there. You opened up my thinking so much, and it was clear when I heard from her that as painful as that day was, it was really important. It's a tough room to put yourself in. If you can bring a friend along for moral support, so much the better. But if you feel like you're up to pushing yourself to that task, it can be very, very important. So I don't shy away from the complexities of the story. We've kind of said a bunch of this already. I guess we really have. I don't need to beat a dead horse on this. But one other point, I'm going to jump ahead to the end of this, which is we've been already saying you can't know too much. You can never learn enough about the subject. It is so hugely complex that you might think, God, I'm in the wrong room. I can't do this. This is, you really do need the PhD. You need to be Steven Spiegel before you dare put yourself in this arena. And the truth is you really don't. In fact, the very fact of the complexity gives you a ready out at the moment when you realize that you're in over your head. If somebody's talking to you and they throw out something to you that you just don't know about, I mean, maybe it's a very tough criticism, and you're thinking to yourself, gee, maybe there's some truth to that. Maybe there's a whole other side to it. What do I know? A great answer is, what do I know? You can say, gee, I don't know about that, or I don't know enough about that to respond. I want to look into it and get back to you on that one. And nobody will think the worse of you for that. And you haven't been disloyal to Israel. You haven't let anybody down. So you can put yourself into any situation at any point along the way, and do your best. And generally, you will do more good than harm, as long as you don't feel the need to get yourself back into a corner. There are. Where are we? We're out of order.
Yes.
The pages are out of order.
Never mind, Peter.
Okay. There are. I'm just going to read this for you until I find my bearing here. Because Ami's a teacher, and as I say, I'm a composer. I don't do this. There are other elements besides language which operate on audience. As a journalist for a while, I learned that I could alter the point of view of the article I was writing through juxtaposition of facts. You have so many minutes to talk. You can select what you have to say in that time, and how you juxtapose your facts is critical. So these are all things to be attentive of as you consider presentations you make. I'm thinking that the page that I'm missing here is where we segued into talking about media and all that.
Yeah, but before we do that, let's maybe and then you'll have time to look for stuff. We'll do the small simulation we're talking about.
Okay.
That will give us I think it's important. What I want to do is I want to give you a small example of stuff, the typical stuff you might hear, and I want to see or practice here good ways to respond. Now, originally I want to talk about the checkpoints,
Right.
but we covered that.
Yes.
So I'll talk about the issue of the Palestinian refugees. Okay, so I'm going to put the hat of the pro-Palestinian speaker for a second. They give me a few seconds to compose. And here we go. One of the biggest hypocrisies in the whole way the media depicts the conflict of the Middle East is the issue of the Palestinian refugees. The Israelis like to talk about the Holocaust and so on, and we all know about that. But nobody talks about the Palestinian refugees. No one. There was a peace process, there was Oslo, they're out of the picture. You need to remember, in 1948, the Israelis deported by force and by terrible actions almost 1 million of Palestinians, native people of the country who lived there for thousands of years. And those people still live in camps, in tents, in horrible conditions. Trust me, I've been there. And in fact, the Israelis, along all the UN resolutions, they are not obeying. There is also a resolution called 194 from 1949 that said that Israel must let the Palestinians go back. Israel should not even have the option. We should not let them have peace without first have the most basic act of justice, which is the right of people to return to their homes. The same right they are demanding for themselves. Okay, so I'm letting you respond, and I will time you because you'll have 1 minute. That's usually what you'll have. Yes, Itzik.
So my first response would be to acknowledge that there is a lot of suffering in the Palestinian side.
Okay.
But then I would like to move on and to say there are other facts that is being misrepresented over here. Since 1948 and on, about close to 400,000 Jews from Arab countries had to relocate and move to Israel. They left with their shirt on their back, and that's it. They came to Israel, they had to resettle, start a new life, and move on with their life. We expect everyone, including us, to help those Palestinians who've been suffering through all those years, but it has to be effort of everyone in the world to help those guys move on with their life.
Okay, just one request from me. Thanks, Itzik. It's good points. I just want to ask you to talk as if you were in the audience. That's because the way you began. You explained to me how you speak. Okay?
Okay.
Thank you, Itzik. Yes.
Actually, the Palestinians ran away. They were not forced out. In fact, they were asked to stay, and nothing would happen to them. They should not leave their homes. But the muftis or whoever promised them, if you run away, Israel is going to be defeated, and then you're going to have the whole country. So.
Okay, I'll let's respond to that. Just one response. In the level of the facts, it's actually that in some places, in many places, Arabs were actually forcefully taken out. In many places they were not, but in some places they were. And we do want, as we said, it's better to acknowledge that, or else they will just say, okay, you're just out of your element. You're just talking, you're lying to us. So we want to acknowledge that in some places it did happen. And I know people who were there, who actually did it. Yeah, you were...
Hello. Shalom.
Shalom.
I am from Israel. I'm speaking English, so that will speak
okay.
understand. My name is Cohen as well, as yourself. Shalom. I want to mention that this young lady is correct in some respect. I have migrated from Poland to Israel in 1957, when Poland was allowed most of the Jews who survived the Holocaust. My mom is a survivor. She's here in the museum in Jewish Federation. So we came to Israel, raw land, everything was very raw. I mean, nothing was settled. Thousands of people migrated. It was very difficult, and coming to the point that we are right now, I have major issues as well. My heart goes out to the Palestinians because justice and humanity has to be respected on both levels. My heart goes to Israel. I have family who lives there. I have cousins who operate those huge jets, teeny little guys, and they push buttons, and they're brave and they're beautiful, and I love them dearly. But if we're going to be global about this, and I understand your point too, as far as being negotiable and reaching out with compassion. We have to have an understanding for these people. But I do have one problem. We are funding millions of dollars. Where is the money going? Why is there no housing? Why is there no electricity? Why is there no water? Why is Arafat's wife having millions of dollars stuck away in Switzerland? Why is the money not being given to the people? That's my argument.
Okay, that's a fact. That's a strong fact.
When someone argues with me, I say, hey, the
That's
money is
good.
available. What are you doing with the money?
What-
Are there any scholars? Excuse me, let me
Yes.
just vent on this because
Go ahead.
it's an issue for me. It's a major issue. And when I do talk to people about Israeli concerns and conflicts, you know, I said, I am on your side as well. Help me understand why are you not allowing the people to have a better life. If someone could enlighten me to that fact, I'll go out and I'll fight with the Arabs against Israel, which I would not do. But you know, the compassion is there. I think that we all feel that way, but we can't be always said, well, it's the Israelis' fault. The points, you know, when they have to the borders, when they have hardships and they can't get through. You know what? We employ millions of Arabs. If it wasn't for Israel, they wouldn't have any food on their table. So there are good
Right.
points on all this as well.
I just want to. Oh, a second, Peter. Okay.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
No,
Thank
it's
you.
good. It's
I'm
good.
done.
It's good because you made a valid
Thank you.
point, which I want everybody to notice. Using the facts. Of course, it depends how we use them, but it is a fact. And I was distorting facts intentionally before when I was presenting, and I intentionally said nobody cared. The fact is that the Palestinians, the UN has one agency for refugees, for all refugees in the world. Besides the Palestinians have their own UN agency, UNRWA.
That's right.
So saying that nobody cares is not true. The Palestinians got more aid for their refugee problem than anybody else in history. But yeah, Peter, go ahead.
Well, I'm gonna add to that and also frame a couple of other things as well. What you said also can be fit under the category of the problem of the Palestinian refugees is not something which the Israelis created single-handedly.
That's
And
right.
then and the example you just gave is part of it, but you also can expand it by saying another aspect of the problem was the response of the other Arab countries to the refugees. The history there is very complex, and the Palestinians themselves are not blameless. The history in Jordan, leading up to the Black September moment when the PLO attempted a coup of Jordan, which made them really bad guests, and they were sent from Jordan and wound up being refugees in Lebanon. There has not been an attempt to absorb and integrate the Palestinian refugees in the other Arab countries, so you bring that into it as well. There were. Shall I plug some of your responses?
There's a person that was raising his hand 3 times. You want to speak?
One thing you didn't mention is that the Palestinians are the ones that didn't accept the partition. If they accepted the partition, they would have their land and we wouldn't have much. They decided to push us out.
That is very
So
true.
they have to accept what they get.
Yes, please.
Am I right?
But
That's
nobody,
a valid point.
I think we
yes.
need to remember, we all kind of are talking to each other,
Right.
we agree. Put yourself in the position where you're in a very hostile
Right.
group of pro-Palestinian people. Not one person here has responded to the point which was made that these people were kicked out of their homes. And what are we going to do about that? Are we going to give them their homes back? All we're asking for is to come back where we were.
And I
What are you going to do about that?
Okay, that's a great. Thank you. Thank you. That's exactly what somebody will tell you.
Right.
Why don't you let them go to forget everything that happened? Why don't you let them? That's the decent human thing to do. Do you have a response to that?
Well, I think that when you brought up your issue, so what I would say is, yes, some people, thank you for what you said, and yes, some people were chased out. Some people left involuntarily. However, 2 other things happened. One thing that happened is that Jews purchased Arabs'
Yes.
land. They went and sold their land. They sold it for good prices. They chose to leave when Israel was being attacked. They wanted to go back, so that was their choice. And then the other thing that happened is that the Arab countries called people back who did not necessarily sell their land. They just left. So a lot of people went by choice, and there were a small amount of people that went involuntarily. And at the same time, the Arab countries did the exact same thing. And 400,000 Jews left Arab countries and came to Israel. So the issue is not simple. It is not just a simple, why are we being this way? We give money to Palestinians, we give money to the PLO, they had to stop funding the PLO because they were managing their money so poorly, so I think that's evidence that the Israeli government has tried to help, and there are peace talks going on. It clearly is not a simple topic of, yeah, oh sure, we can just do this, and the Palestinians also refused in 1967, the Palestinians refused to, no, the Arab countries actually refused the land for peace deal. So the Israelis were willing to give back the territory they took in 1967, and the Arab countries refused it. So I mean, there's so many things going on.
You're very right. The only problem is that this is a long story, and people, it sounds to them like you are doing historical, balance. Yeah, and I think that for what Richard said, and Richard talked about like more the humane situation. People are kicked out. What do you do with them? I think a good way to deal with this, a short and simple way, is saying that letting them come back to where they lived 70 years ago will do more harm than good for everyone, including them. That's the reality.
Why is that?
Why?
Oh, I'll explain. I just had a discussion with Peter a few days ago. Where all the places where they lived 70 years ago are now, there are either Arab neighborhoods or Jewish neighborhoods already instead. So what can you do? Can you kick those who live there now out, make them refugees, and let them live instead? That's not going to be very humane either. Will you make a new villages for them? Sure, great, but if you do new villages, why there? Why not in Syria? What's the difference anymore? It's probably better in Syria because there'll be less conflict.
And there is another issue, and I think finally to really nail Richard's question, at the end of the day, having acknowledged that there has been significant dislocation, and I wouldn't, by the way, say it was a small number who left involuntarily, because a significant number of those people did leave involuntarily.
Do we know what number it was? Or?
We can argue about it, but one of the things about what Ami said that was highly debatable was, he said 1 million when he was being the pro-Palestinian. I've seen the numbers put at 600,000 and 700,000. We don't have exact demographic figures, but one thing which you can do when you're trying to address this question of how do you make it right for the refugees, one short answer is ultimately you can only make it so right. You can't make it really right. You have to acknowledge that the dislocations are profound and for the people involved tragic. And then there's another issue which I think is fundamental. He also mentioned a critical buzzword, so-called right of return. Actually, he didn't call it so-called, he said the right of return. The right of return posits that all the people who are dislocated under this UN resolution have an absolute right to return to their land. And the right of return invokes, by the way, a piece of Israeli law, the law of return, which is a totally different thing, but it kind of rides in on the sound of the law of return. Law of return is about the right of Jews from the diaspora to come to Israel and be accepted as Israelis. The so-called right of return, for two things. One, the answer to what Ami said, a very good answer to the resolution is, when people quote that aspect of the resolution, they're quoting one half of a sentence. The resolution has two parts that have to be brought into play together. The other part has to do with accepting Israel's right to exist at the same time. And that's never mentioned. But the other critical factor is that if there were a right of return, there could not continue to be a democratic Israeli state as a Jewish state. And the other fundamental part about Israel's creation under its charter was it was created as a Jewish state. So you can't have a state, basically you'd be talking about death by demographics. If you brought back the Palestinian refugees, and by the way, a lot of people define them as including their children and grandchildren. So in one fell swoop, you would almost overnight destroy you'd either destroy Israel, or you would create an actual apartheid state in which Israel didn't allow the right to vote for its Palestinian citizens.
Or you make a new Lebanon, or a new Iraq, which is worse.
So you have to say at that point, anybody who's serious about peace, if they talk about the right of return, they're either knowingly using it as a bargaining chip that they're eventually going to let go of, or else they're fanatic or they're ignorant.
If I may add, I mean, I think that one of the ways to deal with it is to say that I can understand I can understand it, but in a way, put what you said now. Even the moderate leaders in the Palestinians leadership are now saying that the right to return is not something which is logical or something that is doable.
Yeah.
That there is that I mean, if the Palestinian leaderships are saying that it's need to be resolved in a way of helping these people, relocating them or building for them with the aid of money, building them new places in the to come Palestinian country. If they are saying that, why are you putting such extreme and making more problems ahead? I think this is the way to do it. I mean, just telling that if the Palestinians are admitting that it's not doable, why should we talk about it anymore?
Well, they'll tell you, and just saying for the background, that no Palestinian leader ever dropped the right of return. It gave up, and it's true. It was never really nobody really gave it up.
But they, I mean, even if you talk about the current leadership in the Palestinian, they're all saying that a resolution should come to deal with this problem and not to
nothing absolute.
Not to come physically and relocate into Israel.
Can I add a point here?
Briefly, but I want to get to a whole other part of our thing, and we're almost out of time already. But yes, please do if you'd like to.
A good background for understanding the refugee problem is a book called From Time Immemorial by an author by the name of Peters. And one point that she brings out in the book was that when the Palestinians, who were not called Palestinians at that time, when the Arabs left Israel right after the 48 war, there were countries who needed people. One of them was Iraq and one of them was Syria. They needed people, but they would not accept the Arabs from Israel. They were purposely put in camps. They've been kept in camps purposely. And the other point made is there was actually an exchange of populations. There were 600 or 700 or 800,000 Jews kicked out of Arab lands, and about 700,000 Arabs that left Israel. So there was actually an exchange of population. And this is nothing new. When India became independent, and they broke off forming Bangladesh, and there was an exchange of populations of millions of people.
I'll just add to that, and a little bit of speak about the media, it's really important. I'll just add to that nobody talks about it, but in the 20s, UN, not the UN those times, but a mediator won a Nobel Prize for organizing a forceful transfer of people, millions, between Turkey and Greece as part of an agreement for peace. But that's a different period.
Also French and Germany.
Also French and Germany. Okay.
So what I want to do, because we've expanded, as I knew we would, we've taken up most of the time with this material, which is incredibly engaging. I want to talk to you now about another way of standing up for Israel, which is in response to media, letter writing, which is another very important way that we can raise our voices. And I mean, this first bit is for you.
Oh yeah, it is. Okay, so I'll make it shorter because of the time. So it's a good thing to, first of all, learn about the medium, learn about the requirements when you write letters. When I wrote, for example, to the Independent, first thing I did was going to the website, see what the length, what is the style, and so on. Some people will write great letters which are too long and won't be accepted, which is a shame. That's for one example. Okay.
I wrote a letter, but I don't know if it did any good.
Well, Peter will probably want to say something about it.
Well, one thing I'll say is every letter has an impact, even if it doesn't run, because most publications really take note of who's writing and what they have to say.
It was published.
Oh, it
I
was
don't know.
published.
Well, certainly
People read.
it does good. Now,
You have to
sometimes
give the
letters.
example, I'm sorry, of your letters
Actually,
regarding
In this booklet that we've handed out, we have included
because the
an
issue of the
article
Holocaust in the comparison is
in the pamphlets that we've handed out for you to look at later on. The last section of it, and they're separated by little blue separators. The last section is an opinion piece in the Independent by this guy Jesse Eichenstadt, which was fairly noxious and very polemically anti-Israeli. And Ami and I both wrote letters that were published in response to it. We've included that, and also you'll find in there a bunch of other things that you might want to take a look at some point, including the criteria for letters for the LA Times and the criteria for letters for the Santa Barbara Independent, and some other examples of some letters and opinion pieces which you can look at your leisure. A few suggestions for effective letter writing. I'm going to crib from this.
Go ahead.
One is, as Ami said, know the medium. Know whether it's a colloquial medium, whether it's a very dry one, whether they really favor the two-sentence zippy thing or the 150-word. A very effective thing is to have a strong opening, a good lead sentence, good lead graph that is concise and maybe a little catchy. It's got a twist to it that makes it interesting. That's a very good thing to do. Another good thing is to really be selective about what points you're going to try and make. You've read a 500-word or 1,000-word article. There are 15 things in there that make you want to froth at the mouth. But you can't respond to them because your reader doesn't have the article in front of them when they're reading your letter anyway. You have to figure what is it you need to do, and realize the most important thing you're going to do is make points yourself, not win a tennis match with the other writers. So you figure out what it is you're trying to target, and limit yourself. Then the last thing I'm going to suggest here is that you also have a good ending. A punchy last sentence is one of the things you'll see in a lot of successful letters. Sometimes that last sentence will also bring you back to something a seed they planted earlier on. It really is a craft, and less is definitely more in this medium. Anything else in there? A bit of humor. A bit of humor never hurts.
Do you ever get to know what the results are? I mean, is there any way, like, do people write in on, I don't even know if they write in on independent.com?
You have independent and the internet. In the good letters, you see a long list of response to that, and it creates discussion. A bad letter will end up with the letter. That's one way to see.
Did you guys get any response?
Oh yeah.
Including from him.
Yeah, and it descended. He was civil. There was one person who accused both of us of being rabid anti-Palestinian haters and
bigots and
you know,
whatnot.
the internet is still the Wild West, whereas what gets published in the Independent or the LA Times is pretty controlled. Even the things that are really angry, but the blogs and the internet, there's no limits. Other questions? The last thing which we wanted to raise is the title of this session was knowing when and how to stand up for Israel, and the answer about, I mean, it's a bit of a false title because the answer really is I can't tell you. We've all had the experience of being quiet in a room where you feel like you ought to speak up and you're not sure if you should and you decide not to, and afterwards it feels kind of uncomfortable and you think maybe I should have. And you have to decide for yourself based on what the room is, what your level of comfort is in knowledge, whether you'd rather speak up or hold your tongue. But one of the things Ami said to me as we talked this over is you never regret the things.
It's better regret. It better regrets things you did and things you didn't do. When you go home, it's better to think, oh, maybe I should have, maybe I said it too strong. Won't affect you as bad as, God, I should have said something. That's the thing that will keep you awake at night. So the way I see it, and Peter maybe have a different take, I don't see silence as an option, basically.
I noticed the person standing in the back of the room is our afternoon guest speaker, who is a bona fide active member of the media, and I wonder if David Lewis, who you'll be hearing from this afternoon, if you have anything you want to toss in about letters to the editor, about responding to the media in general.
Well, I mean, don't be hysterical, speak from fact, speak from the heart. The more you twist something, the more you act strident, the less chance you have of getting hurt. No matter how pissed off you are, don't show it.
Let them be the extreme wild and so on, not you. Yes.
Just in closing, I would like to mention, since we're all very conscientious, loving, compassionate, forthright human beings, I do believe that we always are at the right time and at the right place, and whenever we have a promptings in our hearts and minds as to respond or not respond, I think we should trust ourselves and the Maker and just do the right thing, because you never know what effect you may have, or what the words may be said, or what inspiration may be to bring it in someone else. And I agree, being leveled and having kind of a gentle demeanor is always easier than being, as you said, at the mouth.
So one more thing to that end as well, and I'll call on you as well. We've got a sign-up list as you came in here, and if you didn't add your name to it, I invite you to, including your email addresses, because we're trying to create a kind of a mass communication within this community, so that when somebody spots that Eisenstadt letter in the article in the Independent, somebody told me about it. I sent out a blast to everybody who's on the list from last year, and about 15 letters came out of that. So if you're on that list, it gives you an early warning that something appears, and then you have the option of deciding if it's something you want to sign, give over an afternoon of your life to crafting a letter or not. But do, if you're interested in that, give us your email addresses, and we'll add you to that, and I promise that we won't add you to other horrible spam.
One other point on letters to the editor. Sometimes you have to be a nudge. And by that I mean, I live in Ventura, and I've had many letters published when there's an anti-Israel or anti-Semitic letter in the paper. And if my letter doesn't get published, I call them up.
Really?
And I talk to the person in charge of the editorial department, and I bug them, and that finally gets.
I bet you bug them nicely as you get results.
Oh, yeah.
I do the same thing. I go to the radio station and just talk to them. Say, I'm sorry, I didn't appreciate
Well,
it.
you know,
It's much better to email your letter than mail it.
True.
It'll get in the newspaper much faster.
one person who wrote in that spate of letters wrote a very strident, and although she made great substantive points, it wasn't a good letter. She didn't, and it was also way too long. She called up the person at the Independent, and they said, "Gee, your letter's too long. Cut it." And so she cut it from 400 words to like 200 words, and it was still too long, and it still wasn't well written. And they didn't run it. And she ran by me a very angry screed that she wanted to send to that letters editor. And I urged her not to, and I think in the end she didn't. If you take somebody who's kind of sympathetic and you dump on them, common sense says you're closing the gate.
Why is it that anti-Israel press is so vociferous, and Israel and people don't say anything much?
That's why we have this.
But it's so few. I mean,
Well, we all notice more the things that outrage us than the ones that are acceptable. So I think you have to. It varies from paper to paper. I get angrier reading the LA Times than I do reading the New York Times. It depends on the paper, but we all respond more to the things that outrage us.
I just wanted to make one other point that's really important, which is don't make a false charge. Keep your ammunition dry. Use it for the big things. There's so many times when the word anti-Semitism gets thrown out, and it's not always accurate. And when you use it inaccurately, that destroys your ability to use it when it really matters. Use these, fight the good fight. Don't fight the marginal ones, because the marginal ones might not turn out to be what you think it is. And if you've gone to the wall on those ones, you can't go to the wall the next time when it really matters.
Yes.
Because they won't believe you. You were wrong the last time. So.
I think we're good. 12:59.
Oh, all right. Good job.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.
Wow.
Here?